A new year and a new presidential administration. Kentucky Senator Rand Paul has his sights set on several priorities moving to 2025. Here's that interview with reporter Carly Dick, and a look at some other actions the senator is taking this year. I'm Bryce Patterson. Welcome to the Crossroads Suncast. We'll start with Senator Paul reflecting on his role on the Senate Homeland Security Committee.
The committee was formed after 9/11. It was a committee pulled together of a lot of different areas of government to create something called Homeland Security. It's still sort of a hodgepodge of things, and we have oversight over some of Homeland Security, but some things that you would think of, like FBI, still remain under other committees. But it has a dual function. One is to talk about protecting the homeland from domestic terrorism. But it also has another role, and that is to have government oversight, to see that where things are spent, to see that they're spent properly for the proper purpose, that the funds are not stolen, or in the case of the research that was done in China, that research isn't sent to China without sufficient examination of whether or not that research is safe or not. That's something we're still investigating and will be a big focus over the next really few months to a year is why did the money go to China that we believe led to the pandemic? Why did it go to China without sufficient review by the safety committee? There's a special safety committee that was set up to study gain of function when two viruses are merged and created to be a more dangerous virus. There was a safety committee set up to review that to try to make sure we weren't funding dangerous research, and yet this research never went there. And for 3 years, I've been trying to get the deliberations between the scientists on who discussed the safety, what were the arguments, and then why did this bypass the safety committee? Who was in charge? Someone needs to take responsibility for that because it was such a bad mistake that if this virus came from a lab, maybe 15 or 20 million people died worldwide because of a lab accident. We should know who funded it and why they chose to fund it.
I'm curious about your dealings with the nuclear export. I know Western Kentucky, we have a really large nuclear community here. We're getting ready to kind of recycle some uranium tails. So just as a nuclear community, I'm curious as to how you deal with nuclear exports or just nuclear in general. I'm curious if it's more than just, what's leaving the country.
As far as enriching the uranium trails and Paducah trying to regain some wealth or have some new companies come in and do that, I'm all for that. I hope it is successful. I think that the nuclear energy industry in general is poised to grow if we can get government regulations down to a certain level. For example, the artificial intelligence that everybody talks about, AI this, AI that, the companies that do it need to soak up so much electricity, they need their own power plant. So recently, I think it was Amazon looked to buying a nuclear power plant just to supply an artificial intelligence data center. And I think they should have been allowed to, and the Biden administration stopped it. I think we need to allow all forms of nuclear to pull forward. There are lots of regulations, and for the most part, nuclear power is actually pretty safe. So I'm a supporter of nuclear power. I'm a supporter of Paducah being allowed to use those tailings to encourage more industry to come to town.
One of President Donald Trump's first actions after taking office, an executive order designating drug cartels and gangs like MS-13 as terrorist organizations. It's part of Trump's declaration of a national emergency at the southern border. Here's Senator Paul reacting to that decision.
The southern border that we have is certainly lawless. There are cartels on the other side of the border, mostly. They sell drugs, but they also sell women, children. It's just a humanitarian disaster. The Mexican government really isn't in charge. It's just the cartels rule the place. There are some estimates that the Mexican government doesn't control a sixth of their country, and most of it's up near our border. So it is a real problem. Declaring them a terrorist organization, those may sound good on the surface. I have some concern in the sense that will this mean that we will be sending military troops across the border to, shoot up bandits and come back across the border? That sounds more like war than it does police action. And so we've historically, tried to obey international boundaries between countries. And what happened on the Mexican side, we could encourage and we could help, but we didn't sort of send troops down into their country. So I am concerned with that. Do I want to stop the cartels? Yes. The best way to stop the cartels is to close the border and have no more illegal immigration. When you have no more illegal immigration, they're not going to make any money because people quit paying them. People are paying them $10,000, $20,000. I don't know where they get that much money, but they're paying them that to smuggle them up to the border and through. But when they see both the military arrayed along the border, all the new agents, when they see people being put back across into Mexico when they try to get in, I think it'll discourage them and the cartels will dry up. Maybe the drug trade doesn't go away, but at least the human trafficking trade should be greatly lessened. So we're going to see what happens. I do appreciate President Trump trying to do something. I think that President Biden really failed on the border.
A quick note here. Senator Paul voted with every other Republican in the Senate to pass the Laken-Riley Act on January 20th. President Trump signed that bill into law on January 29th. It requires federal authorities to detain undocumented immigrants before trial if they are arrested for theft or violent crimes. The Laken-Riley Act also allows state attorneys general to sue the federal government for decisions related to immigration enforcement. It's the first piece of legislation Trump has signed into law in his second term.
On the same topic of executive orders, I'm curious about how it will impact the two biological gender executive order will impact federal funding for, say, for example, universities.
I think that's yet to be determined, but I don't believe that we should allow a 6'3" man to play against women in volleyball. It's just not safe. There have been several girls that have been injured. I have 3 nieces that played college level athletics, and they just don't, they work their whole life. I mean, you probably know people who've been in athletics. They work 3-4 hours a day, swimmers, track stars. I'm friends with Riley Gaines, who is an All-American UK swimmer. She worked her whole life for it. And then to have to swim against a man, a biological man. No, we just should have rules. We started out, 20, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, there were no girls' sports. We wanted to have sort of equality. So we helped to develop girls' sports so girls would have a place to compete. And so, if that means cutting off their funds, you want boys to play on the girls' team. I wouldn't play those teams if it were my college. I would just say, we're not playing you. But also the federal government, the money can come with strings. And I think it's not an unreasonable thing to say, there are boys and there are girls, and we've got 2 sets of sports. There have been associations that set up third categories, the outside of schools, and nobody joins them because, frankly, and you don't see a lot of women wanting to compete in men's sports because it would be a lot harder. You see these men who don't do very good competing against men wanting to compete in women's sports. So I think it's unfair. I'm glad that we're moving in that direction.
Okay, I think we may have time for one more, and I want to circle back to your position as chair of the Homeland Security Governmental Affairs Senate Committee. I just want to hear broadly about some more of your priorities, bills that you're looking to recommend.
So we'll be looking at all areas of government spending to make sure it's done efficiently, and also to make sure it's done in a way in which government is not weaponized against people or against the Bill of Rights. One of the things that happened in the previous administration is, and Mark Zuckerberg talked about this in the last week, the previous administration would call up Facebook, come and sit down with them and say, we don't want this broadcast. We don't want people to say masks don't work, or we don't want people to say maybe kids don't need to take COVID vaccine, which are both opinions and constitutionally protected speech. But it was worse than that. They went to Facebook and said, if you do this, we may use antitrust action against you. So it was the bully nature of government. And it would be equivalent to when we finish this interview, what I'm saying is opinion. People can dispute it. People can have other opinions. But what if you had to sit down with the FBI at the end of this interview and they would say, well, what Rand Paul said was disinformation, so we're not going to air that. what is misinformation, what is disinformation is between the public and the people. And the way journalism used to happen, if you had a report and you were doing and you wanted to get another opinion, you'd interview a Democrat or something, versus a Republican, and they'd give opinions and people would figure out what the truth is. But we got to the point where government was stepping in, and I think it's a horrendous example, and it could get worse. I mean, if you allow it to happen where you allow them to meet. So one of the things we're going to investigate and make sure it doesn't happen again is the Department of Homeland Security has 200,000 employees. We don't want any of them calling up media and saying, you can't print that. You can't say that. And that kind of censorship has got to end. And I think President Trump agrees strongly with me on this. And so I think we are going to get to the bottom of it. It's another thing we'll do through our committee to try to, get to the bottom of it.
In the first weeks of the new legislative session, Senator Paul reintroduced his Defund Planned Parenthood Act. The bill, co-sponsored by several Republicans, takes aim at federal funding for organizations that provide abortion care. That includes Planned Parenthood and its affiliates. Paul introduced that bill on January 23rd, just a day after the 52nd anniversary of the Supreme Court's Roe v. Wade decision. Paul also introduced a bipartisan bill with Democrat Ro Khanna to repeal the TikTok ban. Enforcement of that ban has been paused for 75 days after President Trump issued an executive order on his first day in office. Just days before that, the Supreme Court unanimously upheld the ban, citing national security concerns. January 27th, Senator Paul and New Jersey Democrat Cory Booker introduced a new version of the FAIR Act. It's part of an ongoing effort to reform civil forfeiture laws. The bill raises the bar for government seizure of property believed to be involved in a crime. Original reporting for this story by Carly Dick and me, Bryce Patterson. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform.